Alcatraz Island is one of America's most infamous prisons, known for its strict regime and seemingly inescapable location. But what if I told you that it almost fell, just a few years after it opened? Hi, everyone, it's me. And today I'm going to tell you the story of the Forgotten Rebellion, the day Alcatraz nearly fell. It all started back in 1946 when Bernard Coy was just released from Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary. He'd been sentenced there for armed robbery and spent 3 years inside before being transferred to Alcatraz because of his behavior. In those 3 years, he'd gotten into several fights with other prisoners and guards, earned several citations, and even spent time in solitary confinement. So he had a reputation as a troublemaker when he arrived at the island. But Coy was far from stupid and quickly became one of the most educated men inside the prison walls. He finished high school and began taking college courses. He was considered the smartest man in the prison library, reading everything he could get his hands on, and eventually became friends with many of the guards. Even though they didn't always agree on things, he was especially close with 2 guards who shared similar political views. One was a former boxer named Ed Montgomery, who was known for his ability to diffuse situations by using humor. The other was Sam Malone, a tough guy who worked in the prison kitchen and hated seeing injustice. Both men were important to Coy's plan, though they would never know it. For 1 year, Coy studied the prison like a hawk. He learned where every guard stood at every hour, which elevators were used for different purposes, and even the routines of the prison psychiatrist, Dr. James Nolan. He watched the comings and goings of the prison staff and eventually figured out that there were only 2 days a week when the prison had no more than 300 guards. These days were the first and third Tuesdays of every month, when the payroll came to give the guards their checks. These days were called hazardous duty days because so few guards were present. Coy believed that, with enough coordination, he and a small group of inmates could take over the entire prison during one of these payroll days. He found the perfect accomplice in fellow inmate Harold Smith. Smith was serving time for bank robbery and burglary and had a knack for picking locks. Together, Coy and Smith recruited several trusted friends to help with the plan. One of them was Joseph Morris, who served as a getaway driver in a bank robbery and was sentenced to 18 years. Another was Floyd Bishop, convicted for passing counterfeit money. Then there was Louis Demond, a career criminal, and Thomas Silverstein, who'd robbed a post office. In total, there were 8 men in the plan. Each knew that they would be shot on sight by the guards, but they didn't care. They had nothing left to lose. Working together, they crafted their plan, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. On May 1946, the men waited anxiously as Tuesday morning rolled around. Everything was going according to plan. All they had to do was make it through the morning count. At precisely 9:30 a.m., with only 310 guards present, the men made their move. Using makeshift weapons fashioned out of bed frames and sharpened comb handles, they burst out of their cells and charged down the corridors. As they made their way through the prison, they smashed every telephone they saw, cutting off communication with the outside world. They attacked the first guards and overpowered them easily, grabbing their guns and ammunition. Within minutes, they reached the prison yard, taking several guards hostage with them. Meanwhile, word spread like wildfire through the prison that there was an uprising in progress. Prisoners began pouring out of their cells and joined the inmates in the yard. The remaining guards desperately tried to fight back, but they were no match for the inmates who had stolen their own weapons. At this point, the inmates took control of the entire prison. The warden's house had been taken over, all communications were cut, and the inmates were planning their escape. What was supposed to be a transfer of power had turned into a full-blown riot. As the hours passed, more and more inmates joined the rebellion until there were more than 200 of them. With such a large number of inmates on their side, Coy and his accomplices felt confident that they would win. That was until the reinforcements arrived. When the prison was attacked, federal agents were dispatched immediately. The first team of 20 men arrived within 15 minutes, followed by another 50 soon after. These men were members of the United States Marine Corps, who were well trained in combat and prepared to fight. At this point, the inmates realized that they couldn't hold out much longer. They attempted to negotiate with the military, demanding to speak with the director of the Bureau of Prisons, but this request was denied. With no other options left, they refused to back down. What followed was the longest prison siege in American history, lasting for 6 whole days. The Marines set up a perimeter around the island and closed off the waters with a Navy gunboat. They also brought in several trucks filled with sand, which they used to build a wall around the prison. This wall was more than 6 feet tall and prevented any inmates from escaping. Meanwhile, inside the prison, the situation was becoming increasingly tense. The inmates had barricaded themselves in the prison yard and were running low on food and water. The Marines responded by cutting off all utilities to the prison, including water, electricity, and gas. They also used loudspeakers to taunt the inmates, telling them that they were trapped and had no chance of escape. With the Marines closing in, Coy and his accomplices realized that their plan was failing. On the 5th day of the siege, Coy decided that it was time to make a final stand. He gathered the other inmates in the prison yard and told them that they had nothing left to lose. They should either escape or die trying. With that, the inmates launched a desperate attack on the Marines. They charged out of the prison yard, swinging their makeshift weapons and firing their stolen guns. The Marines were ready for them, though, and opened fire. Within minutes, most of the inmates were dead. Those who survived fled back to the prison yard and barricaded themselves in. Coy and his accomplices knew that it was over. They surrendered to the Marines and were taken away from Alcatraz. For their part in the riot, they were transferred to other prisons across the country, never to return to Alcatraz again. In the end, the Battle of Alcatraz was a resounding victory for the authorities. 6 inmates were killed, 37 wounded, and 126 taken into custody. The Marines had suffered only minor injuries, but the cost of the riot was still high. The prison had been severely damaged and would need extensive repairs before it could be occupied again. Additionally, the incident had exposed major security flaws in the prison system, prompting major changes in federal prison security protocols. But what happened to the men behind the breakout? Well, some of them actually did pretty well for themselves. After serving their time in Alcatraz, many went on to lead relatively normal lives. Joe Morris, for example, was released in 1953 and spent the rest of his life working as a carpenter. Harold Smith was paroled in 1955 and became a successful businessman in Texas. Bernard Coy, meanwhile, was the one who fared the worst. After the riot, he was transferred to Alcatraz and then to ADX Florence, the most secure prison in the United States. There he spent the next 16 years in solitary confinement, earning him the nickname Solitary Confinement Slim. Eventually, he was released and moved to California, where he lived out the remainder of his days. Alcatraz may have won in the end, but the Battle of Alcatraz will never be forgotten. It remains one of the most dramatic chapters in the prison's history and a testament to the human spirit's unbreakable resolve. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe and check out our other content.